Welcome to today's podcast. I'm excited to be speaking with Erik de Haan. He is the Director of Ashridge Centre for Coaching. He also holds a position in the Amsterdam School. We might talk a little bit about that. Erik is an author, a supervisor, a trainer, a teacher. He's also a prolific researcher and writer. So we're going to dive into some of that research today, because I think there is something really interesting about coaching research, especially when we hear so much about how coaching isn't that sort of an established, detailed field. When looking at the volumes that you've written about this work, it really shows that is happening and it's there. And perhaps we just need to talk a little bit more about it. So welcome to the call, Erik.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Great to speak with you today.
So, Erik, it might be useful for people just to kind of have a snapshot of who you are, because I recognize that you didn't start off in sort of the coaching or the supervision space. It was I think it was the physics space that is where you started.
If my life started at 18, then that's true, Rob.
Well, I guess, yes, we start way before that, of course.
No, but yeah, I mean, I'm one of the ways of coming into this. I'm the product of the two religions that have divided Holland, my country, historically. So we've had religious wars, and they've been settled, on a border running right across the middle of the country, with below the border the Catholics and above the border the Calvinists. And there's all sorts of varieties of them, but they're very different historically. And so my parents are one of the first generation where there was the possibility of intermarrying. So my father comes from quite a traditional Catholic background where Latin was spoken in church, for example.
Right.
And then my mother came from my university in Amsterdam is still called Free University. It's the most Christian university of the country, but it's called the Free University because they are kind of a relatively free form of Calvinism. Right. And for lots of people, I think, who were there present at the wedding, it was kind of not done, or let's say highly unusual. And they were looking at, let's see how this works out now. And so I'm the product of both of those cultures, I guess, European cultures. And they're now being bridged, and people are forgetting about the divisions we had, the religious wars we had. So that's one way of saying where I'm coming from. And Amsterdam is a crucible of meeting different countries. So that's where or cultures, where I grew up.
And that sort of makes me think about that meeting point and how such a thing has an impact on how you see the world. And perhaps I'm making an assumption here around how that may have led into you becoming a researcher.
My father was also a professor. My mother was a teacher. So I guess it was a little bit in the genes, and in fact the physics comes from my father, because he's a mathematician.
Right.
And I was very clear when I was about 17 or 18 that I didn't want to follow that. I didn't want to become a mathematician because I could see that I would lose the connection with the real world around me, especially with human beings. That mathematics can isolate oneself. And I was so afraid of that I took my high marks in physics and just went with that, and thought, physics is going to be about the real world, and that will ground me, that will keep me safe, something like that. But of course, physics was the wrong choice as well, as I soon discovered.
Because you talk there about the real world, and I know that you've done writings around sort of the relational aspects of coaching and the relationship between coach and coachee, and how that relationship, or the quality of that relationship, how that leads into the quality of reaching the outcomes, or the possibility of reaching those outcomes for the coachee.
Yes. Yeah. So that's something I'm very interested in. And it's very difficult to prove, though. It's very difficult, although we have more and more research nowadays, we might talk about. it's very difficult to really demonstrate that that relationship is so important. And if so, which element is it? Is it that we enjoy each other's company and we like each other and we have affection between each
Mhm.
other? Is that important? Or is something entirely different important? Maybe the fact that we actually speak about our relationship together, that we talk about the here and now of our meeting. Maybe that's
Yeah.
much more important than actually being a good meeting or a feel good relationship. And again, it's so difficult to do really rigorous research on that. It's still an open question, which makes it exciting. Of course, it's still an open
Yeah.
question in large part.
I know for me, I'm always interested in the quality of that relationship. How are we able to challenge, to discuss, to unearth in that relationship, even if we don't necessarily seem like we would get on outside of the space, but how
Yeah.
can we bring something in that space that allows that quality to exist?
Yes. And it sounds like you have experience that can happen, that you can have a feeling of not your cup of tea with the other person, or not your kind of best mate, but nevertheless they say things that trigger something, or they irritate you in a way that needs to be looked into, and can still be a very productive collaboration. And I that's my experience as well.
And I think there's something really interesting there about when teaching the people about coaching, or people in that learning space around coaching, because sometimes they fall into, well, what if I don't like my client? And this idea that we have to like our coachees in order to do great work. And there comes a point where it's not about the liking, it's about the work itself. And when we get the working container right, then the work happens and we don't need to worry about the self and our own emotion in that space.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I agree that liking is maybe not the main criterion for good coaching. But again, we don't know. And that's fascinating. I mean, what has recently been discovered, both in psychotherapy and in coaching, through only a couple of articles. So it's not a certainty or anything like that. But there seem to be significant findings showing that actually the quality of the relationship as perceived by the client makes only an overall contribution to a kind of a baseline level of
Mm,
effectiveness, but is not linked to the actual increase per session during coaching.
right.
So that means if that's true, then the quality of the relationship, or the strength of it as judged, for example, by the client, is not even related to outcomes per session. So what we've been looking at for the last 20, 30 years in research
Mm,
may just be an overall feel good variable, and not something that's affected from moment to moment.
yeah.
So lots of questions still open, I think.
I love that, this idea that we can look at something for a period of time and study it, and it can only and it instead of answering, it generates more questions for us to think about.
Yes, yes. And so it's also a challenge to keep an open mind, because what I see a lot is, and it starts early on, perhaps. I've studied physics, and therefore I kind of trust the results of science. So if we have medical tests around a vaccine, something like that, I will immediately go with it, and I'll take the vaccine even though it hurts, or I might get groggy for a day. I trust those results, and that's my
Mm,
background. But similarly with coaching, you also see that lots of coaches, they trust the model that they first learned. Let's say if they learned NLP first, or
mm,
Gestalt first, or Animas coaching first, or anything like that, then they will be fond of that. They will be their first love, and they will never betray them. And so they go into the world, and they sometimes preach their, NLP has an answer to everything. And as researchers, I think we can't do that. We have to keep an open mind, because we know that we haven't got the evidence yet. We've got some interesting articles here and there, but there's so much we don't know. So even for coaching researchers like myself, who are both a coach and a researcher, it's difficult to keep that open mind.
It sort of makes me think about how, as coaches, we need to keep that open mind as well, because it's, if we get wedded to our first love, as it were.
Yeah.
And I hear coaches preaching, especially when they find something new that works. They preach about that new thing, and that becomes
That can happen as well. Yes, I've
and
seen
then,
that
and then
as well.
and then something else
The
becomes the
latest.
best
Yes.
thing, and then it's the next thing, and then
Yeah.
there's something there about how we stay almost as researchers ourselves as coaches, so that we're never landing in one space and going, this is it. We're constantly questioning. That then enables us to grow and develop and expand as coaches.
Yeah, if we can. Yeah, then I think that's really helpful. Yeah.
And so I'm curious about what's the sort of the research question that you're exploring right now, or are in the midst of looking at.
I've always got several little projects going, which might go to a peer-reviewed article. But I very recently finished a whole book about research, so I'm still, that's still resonating with me. It's called What Works in Executive Coaching. Will come out in early April, and it summarizes the real boom we've had in research in coaching. So in the last 3 years, we've had an explosion of PhDs, randomized control trials, very creative experiments with managerial coaching, etc. And I've summarized all of them about, if you look at it narrowly, if you look at the outcomes of coaching, 160 articles, all scientific original studies, and have summarized them in that book. So I'm still full of that, because I'm also out of the randomized control trials in there. So that's the most rigorous way of doing research. I discovered there were 35 of them, much more than I thought. So we can do a meta-analysis of that. We can bundle them all together and see what they have to say. And then they do say something which is, I think, quite trustworthy, which will stay with us. That is not like the relationship where we don't know anything. This is more about, is it working or not, coaching? Does it make a difference? And I think on that question, we're beginning to get quite a good idea that it does make a difference.
I'm glad you're saying that it does make a difference.
Yes.
All the coaches that are
You're
listening.
You're not a snake oil salesman, Rob. You're a real professional now. Yeah, no, I guess that's why I do this as well. I want to know, all my inner doubts need to be assuaged somehow with research, and they can be, I think, increasingly.
And I think there's something brilliant about this work, because I know when 15 years ago, or it might be longer than that now, actually, but when I first started coaching, and people would ask that question, well, why does somebody need you? What do you bring to the table? And this research allows us to answer those questions more just in a I'm doing good or helping way,
Yes.
but in a more rigorous, in-depth way.
Yes, that's quite true. And I'm really grateful to some of the really refined studies that have been done. So some doctors actually who use coaching in coaching like we use it, grow coaching, for example. They use it to support junior doctors or junior surgeons or registrars. And they use coaching sessions, and because they do randomized control trials, left, right, and center all the time, they've done some randomized control trials of that coaching that they offer to their own students. And it seems that some of those papers are some of the best ones that we have. They're not professional coaches, they're surgeons and doctors, but they know how to set up a randomized control study. And for example, there's one that I remember from the 35. There's one study where they only offer 3 additional sessions to the intervention group. So both the groups, totally randomized, they all have 3 sessions of coaching, and then one group gets 3 extra sessions, and otherwise everything is the same.
Yeah.
And then you can measure quite finely, what the impact is of only just 3 more sessions. And I wish we had thought about that in our, the more professional people. We should have measured so carefully earlier. But the richness of the research literature is really something that's kept me going through the lockdown. Reading all those articles, and it's been fun. Yeah, yeah.
And so that book's called What Works, and I know your previous book was
Oh,
called
yeah.
Critical Moments.
I can show you that. I've got it with me. So this is the Critical Moments book.
Yeah.
You see it? Yeah.
Yeah, and in that one, for those that are listening, it's two trapeze artists, and they're not quite touching yet, so we don't know if one's going to catch the other. And I guess that's that critical moment that you speak of.
Correct. And so the other book is with the same publisher, so it has the same sort of design of the cover, but they touch. They're now holding a firm grip, and it's the kind of firm grip that good science can give you is being expressed on the other cover. So the two covers look very similar. This one is about qualitative research. So it's research into moments and experiences of coaching, case studies, and not so much what you can say about coaching statistically. So that's how the two books, they're both about research. That's how they're different.
Yeah, and I guess that those moments, that's one of those interesting things, because often as coaches we remember those instances. We remember that question that we asked that changed somebody's paradigm.
Yes.
Or a thought that a client had that all of a sudden everything's different. So we can sometimes hold on to those moments, but not necessarily hold on to the process that created those moments.
Yes, because we wish more of that. I guess, is what you're saying. No, we want to have. We feel that there's a lot of effectiveness in that moment, because being referred to more often during and something, there's a kind of a step change in the relationship. Yeah, so we like to know about the process in order that we can do more of these helpful moments. Yeah, that's true. But of course, when you start planning for them or organizing them, then you're quite a top-down coach as well. You're a directive coach. So it's a conundrum. On the one hand, we want them, but we want them spontaneous and emergent as well at the same time.
Yeah, because the moment we start demanding that they appear in our session,
Yes.
we are the drivers of the session, and it's no longer a person-centered emergent space.
Yes.
And also I think the everything suffers. The coaching suffers, the coachee suffers, we suffer, and a question about ego comes in there as well, about searching for those moments.
However, have you heard of provocative coaching? Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Because that is more or less doing that. So it is very directive, highly directive, but it seeks to provide these moments continuously, as it were. So I wasn't sure whether you knew about it, because it's so popular in my country, because those Calvinists, they feel like rebels, and it's really fitting to my country. It's a kind of a rebellion against the Klein, a constant kind of uproar. That's provocative coaching. So it's very popular in Holland. It's not the dominant school, but it's popular.
So I've heard about it, but it'd be great if you could tell us some more, because it sounds like almost like we're constantly creating chaos in the coaching session.
Yes, and mobilizing the client's defenses against that. So you kind of you play the devil's advocate, or you joke, but you joke at the expense of your client even. So you do make it a bit tough on them, and it forces the client then to say, no, this is not what I want. This is what I want, so that they make more of a choice themselves. So they push back, and that's seen as healthy. But you're constantly trying to provide critical moments to them. Yeah. If you want, we can do a little, a little spiel, because I know you've got a background in acting, so I guess we can try to organize it for ourselves here.
We should. Let's do it. Let's do that. That'd be great. I should pick something real, because I think that when it's real, it has much more weight to it. I can feel myself shuffling in my chair as I think about, what would I bring to such a thing?
Yes, there's your first difficulty. What to bring. Yeah.
Well, what would I bring? What would I guess I would. I mean, the question that's one of my drivers is how do I support, lead, inspire my teams so that they can do better. So what do I need to be better at in order for my teams to exist in an environment that allows them to grow?
Yes. So what would a provocative coach say to that?
Mm.
So why would you care? Why would you bother? That's for them to do, for them to let them do some work first. It seems you're far too responsible for, for what your team produces, something like that.
Nice. Because I can feel the emotional tugging. Yeah, but I do care about them and I want them to do well and I want to
Rob.
create
Oh, Rob.
environment.
Oh, you clearly have a lot to learn as a leader. You still care. Oh, gosh. I feel for you, Rob. And that sort of thing, I'm just making it up now, but that's the kind of, so that you then finally have to say, listen, Erik, you're not paying attention. This is important to me, because at the moment my team is not treating me well, and they're saying I'm not motivating them enough, and so you become more agitated and you become maybe more vulnerable in the session as well. But it's highly directive. So it's not really my main approach.
Yeah,
But
and
since
I
you were
think
asking about critical moments, just came to mind.
and I think that what's interesting about that, it forces one to defend oneself. And in
Yes,
that defense, one can see, like, this is what's important to me.
yes,
I guess it's another way of identifying or releasing values into the space.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's one of the many ways, but it's really popular in Holland because we like to be direct, and we like to, we normally we're a bit embarrassed of our provocative and direct nature, but here we can just let it all flow, as it were. Yeah.
And so you were saying there that that's not the way in which you work. It'd be interesting to hear about. So how do you work? Because I'm imagining that the research that you do will inform therefore the work that you do.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting just to hear about. So what is coaching like when one is coached by Erik?
You would have to ask people who know, because I was never coached by Erik. But yeah, I mean, it's something that I also wrote in that new book, that I felt I had to say, listen, I've got my biases too. So I'm also influenced by my first school of coaching. So I'm influenced by my first psychotherapist who really helped me a lot when I was in a crisis as a physicist. So I've been there. I stayed there for about 8 years, 9 years in physics. I was even getting a full-time job in university as a physicist, and I was getting increasingly kind of estranged from other physicists or from the work. So I needed and depressed. So I needed therapy, and this person who helped me enormously and was almost like a substitute father figure or something like that. And he said, well, I'm just treating you short term. I'm just CBT, that's who I am. You can't have it all. You get 20 sessions from me and that's it, and then the subsidy stops or something like that. But the real thing is psychoanalysis, he said. That's the real thing. I never took enough time to learn it, but that's what you really need. Or he said, he said that sometimes in his sessions, that would be more quality. So my first school became when I then changed my profession, and I first went into kind of quite normal organizational consultancy, so not coaching initially. OD, organizational development, you probably know about. But then when I moved slowly into more one-to-one work, because I found it actually much more challenging than sitting down with a group doing action learning or something like that. So I became very intrigued, and then I studied in that field, in the field of psychoanalysis. So there, I have a bias there. I've also learned a lot in Rogersian Counselling. So there's another bias, and the relationship, the thing that you associate with me. You know, the fact that I really believe in using the relationship as we have it. You know, so make it more explicit in during a session, or study what happens when you talk about your leadership, for example, in your company. What then happens between us when you do that? So those are three of my biases, and I felt in that book I had to come clean, because I was going to accuse lots of other people of biases of the researchers or the coaches, or so that's so I have that as well. It's very difficult for me now to, you know, I cannot think badly of my first psychotherapist, and then there was a career counselor after him who was I think he was self-employed, so he this was a private fee, so he could do more sessions with me clearly. So I think I had 30 sessions, and I also remember my father paying for some of that, because I wasn't able to, and I called him my mentor in the 90s when I started, in this profession, or the OD profession, and I could never think anything negative about both of them. They've been such a positive influence for me, and similarly for my models, let's say. So I know that of myself, that I have my strong beliefs as well, and they're not the truth, but they're just my strong beliefs.
And I guess knowing that they are your beliefs and not the truth, in some sense also protects you from them. I'm not sure if protects is the right word, but it allows you to go, this is there, this exists for me, so I can be aware that it's existing, as opposed to a strong belief about a process or a model that you haven't recognized is your biased.
Yeah, very interesting thought. Yeah, it gives you a kind of grounding. That's right. At the same time, it's you don't want to be too attached to your grounding, because there might be other things that might be more helpful to your client.
Which is, I think that which is the researcher and the reflective mind, is that constant questioning. What's most useful here? This might be what I prefer, but what's most useful in this space? And then, of course, we have to define what useful means in that time and space as well.
Yeah. So again, we may have to talk about the relationship. So how can I be more useful to you, or what is it you're expecting from raising this with me? What are you hoping for? And again, and then you become relational again when you do that. Is how I see it. Yeah. But also within psychoanalysis, it's very important to freely associate. Free association is one of the inventions of Freud in the beginning, and but a lot of people forget that it's the free association is not just for the client. So it's important for the client to freely associate, however difficult that can become when it's something painful, but also the therapist, or in our case the coach, they also need to freely associate. So they it doesn't help them if they're too attached to their dogma or to their earlier hypothesis. So they may come up with a hypothesis. Oh, I think this or that is maybe going on for you. And then if the client says, well, I don't recognize that very much, and you don't think, and then you have to be able to leave the hypothesis in order to freely associate again.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, because sometimes we get wedded to an idea of what we think is happening.
Yeah.
And when we can't let that go, everything keeps coming back to that, as opposed to going, exploring, is this what's going on? No, that's not what's going on. Okay, let's look again. Let's explore again.
Yes. And look at us now being so wedded to something, what's happening there between us, that we seem to agree so much all of a sudden, when earlier there was so much confusion. Something to be celebrated, but it's also something to be inquired into if you feel in a lot of agreement with your client, or what's the word, resonance or something. Or
Yeah.
yeah,
I really like that word inquire, because I think it brings sort of research and curiosity together. How do we stay in that inquisitive, inquiring frame, inquiring as to what's happening for our coachee, but inquiring what's happening relationally, and
yeah,
inquiring what's happening for me as well, and holding that sort of three-way inquiry or reflection while staying present in the moment.
yeah. I saw your eyes going all over the place whilst being present here. Yes, correct. There's a lot. That's also one of my things, that there's so many options. There's so many things we can do, and we often forget. We can just carry on listening, or we can say something. And if we say something, there's so many different things we can say. So again, there is a lot of freedom, but often we don't we lose track of the freedom we have in a conversation. I think. Did you know that? I mean, there's two books written that were written by Freud's patients about how it was to work with him. So you were asking, how is it to work with Erik? Well, I hope one day, my clients will write a book about that, so that you can finally have an answer to that question. But they write very funny things about him. The fact that, for example, he jumped up from his seat quite regularly in the room, and he went to his encyclopedia or some other book, and he just looked up what the client said. If they would mention, let's say Amsterdam or something about Amsterdam, then he would go and look it up and say, yeah, I've just found this. Is that relevant? Or, and that's in the middle of psychoanalysis, where we think psychoanalysis is all very, very present and very still. But it wasn't for him.
That's
And I find that
interesting.
fascinating. He took his freedom in a way. He took his freedom maybe to find a source of inspiration even during the session.
Yeah, because that makes me wonder, how often whilst in the middle of a coaching session, will we look something up that the client is talking about?
Yeah, yeah,
And how we may see that as being negative, but it also could be useful. And that's just an interesting game to play.
yes. And now with Zoom, if you work over Zoom, you can do it, but then the client might not know that you're doing that. So it's weird. But I have, though, I sometimes in my coaching, I say these things, and for example, somebody says, I should actually ring him up or something like that. Okay, we can make that into an experiment. We could do that during the session, or when somebody says a word from maybe their own language, and I don't know that language, and I may ask about, where's that word seems to be important, so tell me a bit more about where it comes from or something. And then they might Google it for me, that word or something. And I think that's part of the wealth of what we can do. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess that there is sort of a question of or an exploration of not being restricted, being free, allowing oneself to be
Yeah.
free and use all the resources and tools that one has. And I wonder if there is a grounding or structure that one needs first before you can then go off and do all of that. Do we become too chaotic without great foundations in the work?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we talk about professionals here. So you've gone through certain stages of development. You know certain things before you can. Yeah, I wouldn't say if you had no training at all, just be free. Is the meaning of free association is something you need to think about, and maybe have somebody more senior explaining to you what might be happening, and what might be happening, for example, uh, if it dries up, if it's no longer, if nothing is coming, what might be happening then in the relationship. You can get teachings on that. So yeah, I was thinking after teaching, we
Yeah.
should liberate ourselves again.
Yeah. Yes.
Before teaching is maybe not. It's unless you're like in leadership, they talk about people who are born leaders or born talents, and we can't exclude that possibility in coaching as well.
It's made me think about so many different questions there. I'm gonna jump to an earlier question because you spoke about Rogersian counselling, I think,
Yes.
and I didn't know the term. I just want you to give me a little
Yeah.
bit more around what that is.
Well, it came out of personal experience as a consultant. So I was very passionate as a consultant. You can imagine, being locked up with computers as a physicist, in a space where I felt very unfree and very restrained, even though I think I was in one of the most interesting, from a content perspective, I was in a very interesting group of people who were discovering new things all the time. And it was fascinating in a way. It wasn't, earlier I'd done the elementary particles who were all known by, there's no new particles being discovered, sometimes confirmed, but not discovered. But I was in different field where a lot more was happening on the content level, on the knowledge level, but I felt very limited as a professional. So when I then came into the OD profession, where I could go into organizations, interview people, sit down with them, think about change, think about their conflicts, because I was telling you about the two religions, I'm very motivated by conflict, by mediation, by finding common ground, by transforming polarities, as it were. So I was really going like there's no tomorrow, making many hours, being very billable, etc., and all that. But one of the partners in my firm, I was in a traditional OD firm, and one day said to me, he was, we'd done the interviews, we made a report, we bringing that back to the organization, and then there was one question from somebody in the leadership team, and it set up an immediate response from me. I immediately explained my report again. And then there was another question, and I said, yes, we know the answer to this, or, so there was no listening, no dialogue after presenting the report. And he said, he was much more experienced than me. And he said, that's not good consulting, Erik. You just, you think you know something, and then you start defending that, and you're completely closed to what's going on here now in the relationship, but also to their questions and where they are coming from. And they might not, they haven't got the same information as you. In fact, they know a lot more about their organization than you do. So he said, you have to learn about listening, Erik. This was early in my career. It's a bit hard to admit now even, but yeah. So I went on a listening course, and the best course I'd been told was to do Rogersian counselling, because that's a form of counselling where you're trying to only listen.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And you trust, you build up a very deep trust, a genuine confidence in the ability for the client to move, to grow. It's a real flower power. It was very popular in the 60s, this humanistic approach to our work. And so we only need to listen and maybe summarize what they are saying, and then they can find new ways or new sayings. So I learned that kind of pure listening in those days.
That it both reminds me of sort of the Nancy Klein work, the time to think, but it also reminds me of the clean language work.
Yeah.
As well.
Yes, those are offshoots, I would say, more modern ones. But Carl Rogers was very, very foundational, and also because he had grown up in psychoanalysis, and he said, all this free association from the side of the therapist kind of can stifle the client a little bit. If the therapist has lots of hypotheses and stuff, it can burden the client. What about if everything comes out of the client? What would happen then? So he founded that new kind of tradition. And I would say, yes, I know Nancy Klein, and she's a real good example, I think, of modern day Rogerianism, if you want.
Yeah. This is all so fascinating, and there were so many different directions we could go. and one of the things that you spoke about earlier was or maybe I brought it in, I'm not sure, but sort of leadership. And I know you do organizational work, and I was just sort of wondering about sort of what's sort of happening for you right now in that leadership space with the coaching or the supervision work that you do?
Well, thank you for asking that question. I'm really quite passionate now, still, about leadership and what's happening there. I think we need so much leadership. That's obvious with the crises we have, and we're only at the beginning, of course. It's a medical crisis, but I think the financial crisis that's coming, and then the climate crisis. We probably all agree now, and that's a good thing, that they need attending to, and they're going to be huge. So our ability to work together as very complex teams around the world is going to be under challenge, or in demand, or however you want to put it. So I think leadership, which, by the way, I define as anyone partakes in leadership, not just the person who's in the role, in the official leader. But I think I'd be very passionate to help our leadership to improve, because it needs a lot of improving. It needs a lot of and especially through all sorts of developments over the last centuries, a lot of power is invested now, or is resides within one person. And I don't think traditionally, in terms of where we come from, evolutionary, ecologically, I don't think we're meant to function in such large teams with such enormous power vested in one individual. So we're not prepared for that. And what you see is that a lot of toxicity, I think is the word, I don't know, but coming out of that, and that's, there's another book, which is just, there are more books, but I wrote this one, The Leadership Shadow, which is about that, about how if you are active as a leader, you will be confronted. You will actually be building up your own shadows, or your own toxic side as well. You'll be growing that through being a good leader, a successful leader, and that reverberates in teams, and and there's a lot of work to do for us as a society, probably more than we can actually do, beyond our abilities, maybe, which may mean that we cannot confront these crises, to actually regulate leadership again and make it work. Just like the fragility of democracy that we've seen in recent weeks. There's a fragility of leadership, really. The fragility in the sense that, to bring it all together and to actually use the best the best views from a team or an organization is so precarious. It's so easy to let sales and marketing take over and get a motto or some kind of a dumbing down on that, so that you take the wrong decision.
It's interesting. It makes me think about holacracy and the idea of how do we own our departments but come together to have those discussions and notice where each department meets the other to share in the decision making, as opposed to the leader at the top going, this is what we're going to do, and we just do it.
Yeah.
But also listening to a junior within an organization being able to go, but is that the best way? How about doing it like this? And being open to those conversations as opposed to going, well, no, I know because I'm the leader.
And that's often the best view. There's the junior person might have the best view in the whole organization, or the fool, traditionally the fool, or the outsider. They have incredible views. That's why people do hire consultancy, and that's working very well for them. They try to take the best consultancy. If they want to fix their plumbing or something, they get somebody expert in. But on leadership, that's much more difficult to get the best knowledge from, to reap the best knowledge, which is often there already. And fascinating area. We probably haven't got enough time to
no, because I need to ask the question, when I think about leadership and coaching, I guess I'm not exactly sure what my question is, but it's something about what's the coach's part within that, I guess, as when we think about going into organizations or working with leaders or executives, recognizing that there is that the shadow or the toxicity or the hierarchy that can cut off the useful or interesting voices. I wonder what our part is within that as coaches.
Yes, and corruption and oppression. And so, what do you think? What do you think is important for us? Do you have? I mean, you clearly thought about this.
Well, I think there is the ability to challenge.
Yeah.
I think that the some of this is about when we go into organizations, not just to take the lead from the person that's brought us in to the organization. It reminds me of a lifetime ago when I worked in schools doing drama projects. Often I would go into a school to work with a class, and the teachers would want to tell me who were the troublemakers within that class. Yes. And I would say to them, no, I don't want to know that, because that's your opinion of them. That's the label you've given them, and they are therefore responding to the label that they've been given.
Yes.
When I go into work with them, I don't know any of the labels, so they can create or recreate who they are within this space and choose how they want to interact with me in this space. And that would often mean that the ones that people saw as troublemakers were actually the ones that had all of these great ideas but weren't being listened to or couldn't express it. But together we would find a way to do it. And I think it's similar in organizations. A leader will bring you in, or might bring you
yes.
in. HR brings you in. They say, well, Robert's the troublemaker. He has all these ideas, but never completes what he does. Or whatever, or so-and-so.
Is that true, Robert?
It's why I have a team, because I have great ideas, but I need my team to get me over the line. And I've got a brilliant team, so I'm lucky in that respect. But I think when one goes into an organization is to question the person that's brought you in and their perception of who is the challenge or what is the challenge, for us to then explore that in an open way. So the leader goes, I might be the problem. It might be me, or it might be my team, but let's look at all of that. So how do we get holistic with that?
Yes. Well, then you have already a relatively enlightened leader, if you have that. But I recognize that so much. What you describe in schools, that's absolutely what we still, and they relish it, don't they? I mean, these clients, they love the gossip. They finally can unburden themselves towards you and lay it all on the table. But as soon as your client enters the room, they feel inhibited again, and they are part of the issues. And,
I guess
and I think go on.
I was going to say it just kind of makes me think of systems. It's all systemic or relational.
Yeah. And you're saying that, and you're saying two other very important things. I think that we need to preserve our subjectivity, our openness, our freshness. So we need, as you say, there's another example is some coaches look up their clients on LinkedIn before they have their first session or chemistry meeting. I don't do that, because I don't want the labels that they give themselves either. I just want to meet them. So I don't want this labeling going on either from themselves or I do it for a job interview or something, but I don't do it for a coaching client, looking people up. And I think you say another thing right at the beginning. You said we need to challenge. And that, of course, is going to be the hardest part, because we speak the truth to power. And we get impressed with that. Somebody presiding over thousands of people or billions of dollars or something. I mean, that comes with certain systemic dynamics that will also affect you. And you will be so chuffed to be there in the first place, but then you don't challenge anymore. So that's what we need to work on, I think. Yeah.
It reminds me a bit of what you said about the fool, because the fool challenges everybody.
Yeah.
And makes fun of everybody there, and there's something freeing about being the fool, because people expect that from them.
Yeah. So the fool got through that. They really got through a very deep process, I think. It cleansed him or herself, from all this and a lot of depression, I think, a lot of attacks. And then at the other end, they come out and they're still there, maybe having had years of therapy, I don't know, still there in that organization, finally liberated and able to say, black is not white, white is not black, and the emperor has no clothes on. But that needs a lot of personal work, and
Yeah.
that was recognized, I think, in the Middle Ages about fools. But we have it easier because we come from the outside, so we don't have to suffer all of the consequences of us being challenging. But it's still hard for us as well, I think.
Yeah, and it can be really difficult challenging an organizational's thinking when they're paying for you to be there, because we then fall into those other traps of, what if I get fired?
Yeah.
What if they don't recommend me for something else?
Or they might say, you need to help me. Their clients also say, no, I need to hear about this coaching because you need to help me. I've got a bigger remit than your client, so I need that information, or I need your input. And then I might say, no, but I'm already working with that person. No, I pay the bills or something. So you very easily get corrupted as well if you're not very careful.
And I guess that then calls for that need of supervision to keep an eye on what's happening within the systems and all of that.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think our field is quite well organized, but the field of leadership, of course, is much more diverse and has much more power and money, and so the proper supervisory arrangements, they're not there for leaders. And then we can do something as I think in our profession we can do something, but I would be very, if we could just get a little bit further than just having the individual executive coach that is able to challenge or something, but that we could really do something about leadership. That would be, I think that would help us in the crises that are there. But I'm struggling with the answers to that as well. I don't think we should have Mr. de Botton. I think he has a school of life or something. Send all the leaders back to school or something. But I'm not sure if that's the answer.
Yeah, there's some interesting things in Brené, I think, is it Brené Brown's book, Dare to Lead? There's some interesting ideas about being courageous leaders and calling on the courage of our leaders.
Yes, okay.
To step into that space. And she talks about, how do we, as leaders, how do we have that courage to really lead, but not lead just from the front, but to empower our teams to be leaders in the space.
Sounds like you got your answer to your coaching question from earlier.
So this is what it's like to be coached by Erik. I'm experiencing it now.
Yes, you are. So you've given yourself some homework. Go back to that book, and then you'll be fine. Yeah, no, but it sounds helpful. Yeah.
So Erik, I could talk to you forever.
Me too.
And I I'd love to have you back to continue these conversations. But before we close, I'd love to sort of just hear what's sort of next, or what's on the horizon for you.
What's on the horizon for me? I don't know. Without thinking, our horizon has become a bit, with vaccination, maybe, going back into the world. No, but you mean in terms of the field? I think the field of coaching, I've got a few other studies in, one about artificial intelligence, robotic coaches, and one about trying to use real conversations by real coaches and which have been videotaped, and then to analyze, what do these people really do, and see if you can build some quantitative research around videos. Has been done already with students, especially in Germany, with lots and lots of students. But of course, that might be different from executive coaching, from what we do. So those are little projects that are being in gestation, let's say, or data collection, if you wish, which I'm passionate about. But the bigger thing, what's next? I think the bigger thing is how do we approach our crises? Yeah. And it's not enough to say, okay, we're going to become climate activists. I don't think that's enough. So I think it doesn't to be an activist doesn't be what's the word? It doesn't fit very well with the role of coach, where you try not to be so directive, and it is not always helpful. So you try to just stand back and observe and make sense, and that's and so it's important. So you can't really fight for a greener, more trees as a coach, I feel, although some coaches do.
Yeah.
I think there's another level, the level of consciousness and unconsciousness, and how they interact, and can we do something to make our leadership saner, or better balanced and able to take in difficult messages from the rest of the organization. That would be something I'd like to really invest time into.
That sounds fascinating. I'm also really interested about the world of AI and coaching, and what that's gonna bring, and how, I hear coaches rebelling or pushing back against it, and I have a curiosity about what happens if we embrace it and be collaborators with it. What does that bring? So I'll be looking forward to reading that research and having another conversation with you around that. Erik, it's been a
really lovely,
a real pleasure having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Same here. Thank you for having me.